Es muy interesante lo que hace Mike. Lo ha hecho tanto en Asia como en África y ahora en Latinoamérica, especialmente Colombia, Brasil y ahora en México, pero también en Nepal, la India, Tanzania, y algunos, Sudáfrica, y no sé, en el sureste, no sé si en Indonesia.
Un poco. Sí.
Y bueno, pues para mí es un gusto tenerlo aquí. En principio hemos pensado, y quiero disculparme porque yo soy parte del grupo que organiza estos seminarios, y lo habíamos programado en principio para el 31, viendo pues todo lo que es el presupuesto, en fin, toda la logística que es complicada aquí, ¿no? Sin embargo, Mike viene por unas semanas, un par de semanas, y yo lo había propuesto para 2 días. El primero sería un taller más de carácter teórico conceptual, revisión, en fin, que conozcan los ejemplos, la idea que tiene, especialmente relacionado con esto que empezamos a platicar al principio del seminario, que es la ética que se requiere para la elaboración de este tipo de instrumentos y de productos en función del trabajo con la gente, el compromiso que uno adquiere a la hora de hacer mapas con la gente. Entonces, una cuestión ética, una cuestión moral que a mí me preocupa y que él le preocupa y que ha trabajado en esto. Y un segundo día para hacer cuestiones más operativas, es decir, hacer ejercicios para que ustedes en campo pues sepan utilizar el GPS, puedan digamos, hacer sus mapas con una coherencia en términos técnicos y metodológicos. Desgraciadamente Mike no puede estar con ellos por lo pronto, pero me dice que si hay el interés y si se ve, se refleja en el trabajo, en lo que nos va a presentar el día de hoy, la necesidad de hacer algo más práctico, ¿no? Por ejemplo, no todos sabemos utilizar el GPS, no todos sabemos hacer una serie de técnicas para elaboración cartográfica, que a final de cuentas es sencillo, pero que hay que aprender esas técnicas, ¿no? Entonces, Mike me ofrece, pero no me dice todavía cuándo, porque va y viene, que podría estar con nosotros más adelante en una sesión de carácter práctico. Y entonces lo que haríamos es, por ejemplo, cómo se utiliza un GPS, qué es un GPS, y salir a hacer ejercicios aquí mismo fuera de la oficina, y traer a una compañera que se llama Alejandra Larrazábal, que es experta en este tipo de cosas, para ir también haciendo la conexión de nuestros mapas que hacemos en el campo por una traducción hacia los sistemas de información geográfica. Ya tuvimos una sesión con David Jiménez, pero fue una sesión inicial, y una última parte de lo que hace él es pasar toda esta información que obtenemos con la participación de los actores locales, es traducirla de manera cartesiana, de tal manera que se necesita el sistema de información geográfica. A algunos a lo mejor no les interesa, pero algunos de ustedes tendrán que hacerlo para traducir esa información a una base de datos. Entonces se requiere de un día de taller mucho más práctico. Veamos en esta sesión, que es más conceptual, es más, digamos, conversar con él, en fin, escucharlo, si ustedes sienten la necesidad de tenerlo un día más y si hay esa posibilidad en función de las fechas. Écar está por llegar, él iba a abrir la sesión, pero bueno, está en el camino. Llega por aquí el ratito. La otra cuestión que quiero comentarles es que Mike habla español, pero entre holandés, su lengua materna, que es inglesa, y el español, bueno, le cuesta un poco de trabajo, acaba de llegar, en hacer cambio de chip, ¿no? Pues yo voy a intentar hacer traducción cuando yo lo considere necesario, pero también quiero preguntarles al principio si ustedes escuchan el inglés y lo entienden. A mí me gustaría que alzáramos la mano para ver más o menos cuál es el balance, sin pena, porque para eso estoy yo. Si no lo entienden, yo hago más trabajo, porque entonces lo traduzco. Hemos dado cursos, hemos dado muchas cosas los dos, y entonces ya sabemos cómo hacerlo. Y entonces simplemente, sin ninguna pena, oye, no entiendo, regresémonos, lo explico, y entonces de esa manera avanzamos sin ninguna pena, porque para eso estoy yo, ¿no?
Buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias a Narciso y Ina por la invitación, por presentar mis ideas o nuestras ideas sobre SIGP. SIGP es SIG participativo, GIS participativo y mapeo participativo. Creo que es muy importante, es necesario por a full investigación de manejo de recursos, manejo de tierra para los actores locales, indígenas y ejecutorios. As was introduced by Narciso, es más fácil, es más mejor por ustedes si hablo en inglés que en Spanglish or in Spanglish. I think you will understand better when I speak slowly in English. The majority of my PowerPoints are in Espanol. Sometimes a few are in English. In that case, we can slow down and maybe do a translation of the PowerPoints. Majority of PowerPoints are in Spanish. And as Narciso said, please stop and ask questions. The first presentation is about how mapeo participativo, participatory mapping, participatory GIS, SIG participativo, SIGP we call it, or mapeo social, how it is used in the world, but I'm focusing on America Latina. There's some very good material from Brazil. I guess I would say Brazil is the country in Latin America which has done the most work, the best work with social mapping, participatory mapping, with indigenous groups and also with other special groups like African groups in Brazil. Brazil has a lot of material. Of course, it is mostly in Portuguese, but it's not such a problem. Even I can read some Portuguese because I know some Spanish. For you can read Portuguese. It's not difficulty. So search out on the web some of the material from Brazil. Another country in Latin America which has done a lot of good work with this participatory mapping is Colombia. Not so much, but in some areas of Colombia, and I have some examples. Less frequent but interesting is from Peru, a little bit, probably Peru is the next country, Peru, Ecuador, that's the main ones. In Central America, probably the country which has done most is Nicaragua, and I have to say Mexico is behind. That's one reason why we're encouraging people to do. There's a few really nice examples from Mexico, but the potential in Mexico is enormous for many reasons. The country, the people, the variety of activities, the technical potential of the experts, of people like you. So we are now doing propaganda to encourage more people to do it here. Okay, I won't say much more about myself. As already been said, I'm a geographer by training and by interest and by love. I love geography. Geography is the one place where you really get the social, the physical and the human elements of the world together. So we argue with anthropologists, economists, geologists, etc. In geography, we can bring together. My background in working is in Africa, South Asia, and now at UNAM. Okay.
Mike quiere resaltar aquí es esta idea de que en México no hemos hecho un ejercicio como en otros países de Latinoamérica. Y esta
That way round.
es muy importante para un país como estos, y especialmente
So I was doing myself.
un proyecto de esta naturaleza. Entonces, fíjense, yo creo que sería el primer grupo en el país. I'm saying maybe this is the first group. This is a huge
Big group, yes.
¿no?
Yeah.
Es el primer grupo, el grupo más importante que entraría en el país con este enfoque, y esto le daría, digamos, hay relevancia en ese sentido, y porque pensamos que puede esto promover un entrenamiento más adelante a otras gentes, fundamentalmente gente más joven que quiere meterse al sistema de información geográfica, y que se puede hacer inclusive con la gente local.
Okay. Yeah. So, as I say, stop if you have questions, especially some slides are in English, but majority are in Spanish. So maybe sometimes I have to translate back to English for me. Okay, simple introduction. Mapping of territory and landscape. Why? And what and how? The how, this doesn't show very well, but never mind, but cómo. We will deal in the second presentation, will be about methods. This presentation is about the why and the what. And I wrote this presentation for, as I say, America Latina. So because I think it's clear what it says, but why this mapping of local territories and local landscapes, because it's vital element for the local population and the people of Latin America. It's in my presentation and in the work we do a lot of work with indigenous peoples, but we also work a lot with local rural populations and also local urban populations. In most of this approach, there is a distinctions, of course, between local communities like ejidos and indigenous communities, but this approach of local mapping is for working with local people anywhere. The whole point is that local people have local knowledge. They have knowledge which the outsiders don't have. You people know this is what you're working with, but it's an important part. It's a vital part. It's an essential part of this whole approach, the whole philosophy of SIGP, participatory mapping, is to work with local knowledge held by local people, a local knowledge of different types. It's not necessary to be an indigenous to have local knowledge. Other people also have local knowledges, even in urban areas. So usually in the presentation I'm not making a special distinction for indigenous or other local populations. It's the value is the same. When we want to move on to say how do we do it? So it's the questions of why and what and how. So we'll, yeah.
Sí, claro. Sí, bueno, yo estoy probando por si se necesitan.
Okay. Sorry, one was missing. Never mind. Something I wanted to say is we could do more of a justification for doing it. The justification is the relationship between local people and local resources, the relationship between local people and local landscapes. There are many justifications for this in the world. One justification is an ethical one, that the local community, maybe especially indigenous communities, but I would say other local communities, have a right, a human right to be responsible for their local, to have rights and entitlements to their local resources, their local land. So there's an ethical or even a legal reason for that. But there's also you could say a very practical resource management reason, that the local populations, especially indigenous populations, have a lot of good knowledge of how to manage the local resources, the resources of a forest, the grasslands, the water, which outsiders don't know. So in English I could say there's a pragmatic reason as well as an ethical reason. And therefore that's justification for doing these studies of local knowledge of local resources. A third reason, which we will see several times, third justification for local mapping, participativo, is the process of the mapping in a participatory way also gives empowerment is a small part of empowerment to the local community. I will not say that teaching people how to do mapping changes the lives of everyone. Of course not. It's a small thing. But it helps to give more power, more responsibility, more self-confidence to a local community. By teaching them this technique, they're also learning a new skill, and a new skill which is valuable in their transactions, in their conflicts with government or with outsiders. If the local people cannot make their own maps of their own land, they are always at a disadvantage, because the outsiders, of course, have maps. The outsiders, whatever it is, the government or the police or the oil companies or the forest companies, they have maps, they have satellite images, they have everything. And the local community has a map inside the head, and that's wonderful, but you could also say, so what? Doesn't help them in the legal conflicts and the institutional conflicts. The idea of PGIS, one idea is to get the mental map, the map of the head, into a form, paper or computer, in which the local community puts them on the same, in English we'd say a level playing field, they have the same capacity as the outside agencies. So those are, I would say, three justifications for doing this local mapping. Local people have a right, an entitlement to their local land and their resources. They have knowledge about management, which is often better than the knowledge of the outside scientists. Not always. I'm not saying it. Local people always have a perfect knowledge, but they have another knowledge of resources. And the third thing is that working with local people, so they learn how to do this modern mapping, gives them helps to empower them in their various conflicts with the outside world. Okay. Now, what are we talking about doing this local mapping? It's yeah. Okay. The top picture is in South Africa, and this is one of the in an area where there's an indigenous local community, a Zulu community, and they are in conflict with sugarcane farming. It's a area called KwaZulu-Natal, and he's just pointing out, this is our land. So we stand on the top of the hill. It's the same as being in a satellite or an aeroplane. You can look down, you can see things. Hills are very, very important for doing local mapping. Extremely important. In the country I live in, Holland, it's impossible, because Holland is like this, completely flat. Nobody has an aerial view. But here we have an aerial view. And he's just showing, this is our land, and he's showing the relationships between the local people and the land which has been taken by sugarcane. So, power. Mapping the land is a way of inscribing power. The second picture below is a map of Canada, British Columbia, and it doesn't really matter if there's blue lines and red lines. The red lines, I can't remember which is which. The red lines are the areas of indigenous communities. British Columbia has a big variety of indigenous tribes. They call them in Canada the First Nations, because they came before the English and the French and so on. So the First Nations were the indigenous groups. And the blue lines are the government areas for mapping watersheds, cuencas. And what the map is showing, they don't fit, they don't match. Yet the government and the scientists and the planners would like local people to be more involved in good water management, in good land management. Therefore, there should be a connection between the traditional boundaries of the indigenous tribes and these government or scientist-designed boundaries for water. Is it okay?
Una síntesis. Bueno, en síntesis, pues hay tres elementos muy importantes o digamos vitales de la elaboración de una cartografía participativa que están ahí señalados. Fundamentalmente, el último es, digamos, el más importante, porque está relacionado con el poder. Entonces, en este tipo de cartografía, la idea de poder es central, es explicar el poder. ¿Por qué? Porque los actores locales no necesariamente tienen que ser indígenas. Nosotros podemos trabajar con niños en la ciudad de Chicago, o en la Ciudad de México, o en un barrio de Puebla, o etcétera, para ver cuál es su conocimiento y su estrategia para caminar desde su casa hasta la escuela, pasando por lugares donde hay pues algún borracho, un perro que muerde, un semáforo con muchos automóviles. Los problemas que tenemos a la hora de tomar decisiones en la vida cotidiana forman parte de este conocimiento local, y de alguna manera nosotros tenemos un mapa mental que nos permite tomar decisiones. Entonces, en este sentido creo que es muy importante señalar que no solamente se refiere a conocimiento indígena, se refiere a todos nosotros, porque todos nosotros somos locales de alguna manera. Y esto entonces tiene que ver con la posibilidad de tener instrumentos para mapear, no solamente el mapeo mental, sino para mapearlos, y tener la capacidad de, con estos instrumentos, negociar con aquellos otros que son externos a nuestro espacio y que tienen esos instrumentos, imágenes de satélite, mapas, ahora esto que utilizamos en los automóviles para que nos digan por dónde tenemos que ir, y inclusive si hay tráfico o no, si está ligado este aparatito a la radio, que nos están diciendo, bueno, pues vete por otro lado para llegar a tal lugar, vas a tardar tantos minutos, etcétera. Esos conocimientos, esos instrumentos, esa información no la tiene la gente la tiene aquí. Entonces, el hecho de hacer mapas desde esta perspectiva es construir o potenciar la capacidad de poder que tienen los sujetos para establecer las negociaciones con los que están afuera, ¿no? Entonces, eso es central, y entonces él dice, bueno, aquí tenemos un ejemplo, el ejemplo de Sudáfrica, el señor que está diciendo, tenemos un conflicto por la distribución de las parcelas de caña de azúcar, ¿no? Entonces, si yo mapeo mi espacio y veo dónde están las áreas de conflicto, voy a tener más posibilidad de negociar con los otros, las compañías que están, digamos, contratando a los agricultores, como está dando en México, y entonces tendré más elementos para decir, pues no, aquí no, etcétera, etcétera. Y en segundo lugar, el segundo ejemplo era Canadá, British Columbia, la Columbia Británica, que es acerca de límites.
Well, the gap between the boundaries of the tribes and government boundaries. That's all.
Un tema que a nosotros nos interesa mucho, es decir, cómo las agencias gubernamentales establecen los límites entre territorios indígenas, por ejemplo. cuáles son los criterios, etcétera, y cómo nosotros, los que viven ahí, los que construyeron su territorio, delimitan sus propios territorios. Son dos maneras a veces muy diferentes y contrarias, ¿no? Entonces, con el hecho de que un pueblo indígena conozca sus territorios y les den sus territorios con mapas, le da más elementos para decir, bueno, esto aquí no es, o esto debería ser de alguna manera o de otra manera al interior del territorio.
Gracias. Okay, these quotations I think are self-explanatory. Maps are very important, that's what it's saying. Not just because I am a geographer, I say that. But maps are also misused. They're used for bad purpose as well as good purpose. And I think that the first quotation is a nice one. He's talking particularly about Latin America. This is true for other parts of the world also. Okay, the guns are used first to steal the land, but the map is used then to justify it, to make it permanent, because guns could always get the land back again, but the map has created it. Maybe this is from Nicaragua, and maybe you've seen this recent fight between Nicaragua and Costa Rica over one small island in the river, and Nicaragua is claiming that Google Maps is the truth, and therefore this island belongs to them, and Costa Rica is claiming that no, a map which was made in 1920 or something is the truth, and the island belongs to them. But they're fighting about the map, what the map shows. Maps are important. Okay. Participatory mapping. Well, you are anthropologists, you know a lot about participation, you do participatory research, you participate with communities, so I don't need to say much about that. My conclusion is that the mapping and the working with the more technical things of GPS, GIS, should also be done in the maximum participatory way. So participation in the preparation, the design, the practice, the implementation, the practice of the mapping. Participation from the beginning. We will talk about that later today also, where the participation comes in. I expect with your background you know that participation can never be 100%. There's no such thing as 100% participation, but we try to have more and not less participation. The participation, of course, is also related to the product of the maps, the output, the product, the information, the spatial, geographical information. So it says the control and the use of the results of the maps. And then we try to create this into SIG participativo. These two pictures are both from Mexico. Jalisco is the top one, and the other one is from Michoacán. And they're doing different kinds of participatory mapping. The first one more like a sketch map, and the second one they're working with an aerial photo. We will look at the tools later. Okay. This I made this point already. A reason for doing local mapping, one reason for doing local mapping, is because of local knowledge about good management. And it's a global justification for doing this. We work a lot in forest areas, and the majority of forest areas, maybe a large number of forest areas, are still managed and controlled to some extent by local populations, indigenous populations or other local populations. Therefore, it's essential that the local people can give their stories, give their knowledge, give their wisdom about how the forest management works, and we want to map it. That one, okay, it's just an example, a picture of local map made in Jalisco, Cosalapa, by the women you saw in the earlier picture. It's just as an example, the reason that this group of women, which is the top group there, wanted to make these maps was they're thinking of a proyecto de ecoturismo in their area. They have some interesting trees, forest, birds, interesting for bird watchers, and they think they can make a ecotourism project with, they want to show the routes and the paths, where you would walk, what you would see in different places. So it's just a typical example of local mapping for a purpose, for a reason, and it was their reason. That point I would like to emphasize. When people say, what is the most important word about local mapping? I say the most important word is purpose. Why is this map being made? It's easy to make the map. It's easy to get the knowledge. It's not really easy, but the knowledge is there. We have the tools, we have the techniques. The most important key question is, why is this map being made? For whom? For whose purpose? For whose benefit? So I like this example because it wasn't actually, we were together in this project. It was not our idea why to make the map. The reason to make the map was from the women's group.
Déjame hacer una síntesis. Entonces, digamos, en este caso que se está presentando es un trabajo que hicimos en el marco de un curso de posgrado que damos juntos, y el ejercicio fue muy interesante. Yo ya les platiqué hace poco y les enseñé algunos de los productos, pero la idea central es, en este caso es una propuesta que hace una cooperativa de mujeres zapatistas en el margen de la Sierra de Manantlán, que tienen una propuesta de producción de café orgánico, lo que era un cafetal a sombra bajo una selva mediana, muy rica, donde había una diversidad de aves, un patrimonio muy rico ahí. Se convierte en pastizales y ganado, y las mujeres deciden tomar los cafetales y hacer de estos cafetales un recurso turístico. Entonces construyen un proyecto de ecoturismo. Entonces, los resultados son interesantes. Ellas nos invitan, ellas nos dicen, nosotros queremos hacer esto. Es decir, aquí lo importante es el propósito del mapa, ¿no? Esto es central, digamos, no es simplemente elaborar un mapa. Elaborar un mapa es muy sencillo, y más en este caso con la gente, porque no hay, digamos, esa metodología cartesiana, ¿no? Entonces, pues dibujamos y trabajamos con la gente con una serie de técnicas, pero lo importante es aquí, ¿qué quiero mapear? ¿Para qué lo quiero mapear? ¿Cuál es, digamos, lo que está detrás de la intencionalidad de hacer un trabajo colectivo para establecer unos patrones espaciales que la gente conoce, ¿no? Lo que él dice, el why, el por qué, es central.
Okay. Yes, the maps, the local maps, the indigenous maps, community maps are not simple. They're very, very rich in information, very rich in knowledge. They do not always fit what a standard geographer would like. You see up at the top, how about this way around? No, this way around? Not working? Okay. In the top corner, yes, over there, is a north, south, east, west, which geographers always like to have. But that was added afterwards. It was not necessary for the women to make that. The same geographers like to have a scale. They like to know how many kilometers and so on. But for this situation or many other situations, maybe the scale should not be distance, but the scale should be time, for example. Because if you are always walking and you've got mountains and things, a distance scale doesn't mean anything. 5 kilometers might be 1 hour walking. It might be 5 hours walking, depending how you have to go. So the standard geographer's idea that things should be by distance. In Indonesia, I had a friend, he was working in a village and he asked people about the next village or something, how far away is it? What distance is it to the next village? And the answer was 2 rice cookings, meaning the amount of time it takes to cook rice multiplied by 2. That was the distance to the village, because they convert distance into time. People don't think in 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, they think it takes 1 or 2 hours. And you don't measure time by hours, you measure time by how long does it take to cook your rice. So that was the answer. And in standard geography, that's difficult to put on a map. They want kilometers, miles, something. Yeah? Is that clear?
No.
No, I think explain that one.
Interesante, ¿no? Porque cómo miden la distancia las gentes, ¿no? A diferencia de la distancia que nosotros podemos medir en términos cartesianos, la gente relaciona la distancia entre un pueblo y otro es lo mismo que cocer, el tiempo que se lleva a cocer un arroz, ¿no? Lógicas que no tienen nada que ver con nuestra lógica, digamos, medible en términos cartesianos, ¿no? Entonces, esto tiene una base fundamental para entender cuál es la racionalidad que hay detrás de la construcción de un mapa, qué tienen que ver las distancias y cómo se miden las distancias en tiempo, en actividades, ¿no? Para establecer, digamos, estrategias cotidianas, ¿no?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's part of participatory mapping, is to work with the measures which the local people, the community is using.
Perdón, una duda. ¿El mapa establece o puede dar pautas de estas relaciones cotidianas entre las personas y también, digamos, se pueden representar dentro del mapa? ¿O es esa parte como que no le entendí?
Claro, tú puedes hacer una leyenda, si haces una distancia entre el pueblo y el otro pueblo, tú puedes poner una leyenda con una línea con el crecimiento de arroz, por ejemplo. Hay otro ejemplo que a mí me tocó recientemente. En la Chinantla, un viejo me dijo, Juan, le digo, ya me tengo que ir, y me dice, ¿a dónde vas? Voy a Holanda. ¿Cuánto tiempo te tardas? 10 horas. Y dice, no está tan lejos, porque yo voy de un pueblo a otro en 10 horas. O sea, para que
same. Right.
Es esa relación, no es el avión, no es esa distancia, esa percepción que tenemos de la distancia.
A task, a job for geographers, and maybe for you people if you start mapping, one of our tasks is to make the conversion, because the mental map of the people is in terms of time, but when that community is going to the provincial office or the government office or working with CONAFOR or government agencies, they need to be working in the language of the powerful. They need to be working in the language of the government. So the job of participatory mapping, one of our jobs, is to help to make the conversion from the measures which the local community is using into the measures which the government is using. Perhaps you can explain.
Sí, esto es muy interesante porque digamos que el mapa entonces y la forma de medir las distancias, etcétera, en términos de actividades y de tiempo por parte de la gente, se requieren traducir para establecer un diálogo con los actores externos, con los agentes, no sé, de una agencia de gobierno, pues, que tiene otro razonamiento de distancia. Entonces, lo que se establece con el mapa es un mecanismo de traducción para un diálogo entre actores diversos que tienen una construcción mental sobre el universo y en este caso sobre el espacio, y en este caso sobre el territorio de un pueblo, que se mide de diferentes maneras y que cada una de estas formas de explicar el espacio y de medirlo tiene una carga de poder. Entonces los locales tienen menos poder, y de lo que se trata es de establecer, digamos, relaciones donde haya más poder de la gente local para establecer mejores negociaciones y que no pierdan.
Mm-hmm. Porque mapas se poder. Maps are power, so you have to, if an objective is for the local community to have more power, to be empowered, they have to be able to work with the maps of the powerful. I think. Okay, I think we've said this one already. Local people, local population know their own land. They have a long-running, it says at the top, they have a long-running, rich knowledge about their physical environment and the context, the resource space, the management of resources. You could take someone from a center of the city of DF and put them for 5 generations in the forest, and then they would understand the forest very well. But in the first 2 years, they don't understand the forest. Of course, the local knowledge is accumulated, but it is there. It's very, very important. This is one of the things which we're trying to map. Okay. I said this at the beginning, that this local knowledge about local resources is not just indigenous people, but also for other groups of people, settlers who may have lived in the area for a long time, for maybe generations, and who have a strong connection with the landscape, a strong connection with the local resources. In reality, indigenous people are more likely to be dependent upon local resources. Therefore, obviously, they have more knowledge of local resources. But you can also find settler populations, external populations, people have come in. But if if they're dependent upon local resources, then they have to have a knowledge. And that's what it says. They have a particular affinity with the land in which they live. Pictures are from Mexico and Brazil. No, and Colombia, sorry. Yeah. And they're working with, in this picture, they're working with this one, the Indios. They're working with a tablet PC and GPS in Amazonia.
En el Amazonas es un grupo amazónico que está trabajando con una tableta, estas nuevas, los iPads, ¿no? Con mapas y hay una rápida con reconocimiento del espacio. Inmediatamente pueden utilizar el iPad sin problemas que a veces uno tiene.
I will show some examples later from Amazonian Peru and Brazil, where the local community, the indigenous communities, are using very high-tech equipment to protect their land, to monitor outside invasions, to monitor the oil companies, to monitor the ganaderos and so on who are coming in. Okay, so what are the reasons? Perhaps I break it into 4 or 5 different applications of local mapping. And I put this one first, reclaiming our land. I give that first because in the technology of participatory mapping and of SIG participativo, the first work actually, the first good examples are from Canada, from the indigenous people who are making a legal claim to reclaim their land from outsiders. To do that, they have to go through a legal process. They have to go to the law, they have to go to a court, and they have to make their claim in court to lawyers. This is our land. This is our traditional land, and is not the land of the English or the French who arrived. Also, is not the land of the other tribe who lives there, who would also like to have our land, because of course these conflicts are also between the indigenous groups, not just with the outsiders. And they have to make the maps and do other things. This was the first good examples of using this methodology, and for that purpose. The lower example, this one, is from Africa, from Kenya. In Kenya, also an indigenous group. Their land has been taken not by foreign invaders, but by other Africans. the previous president was from a certain tribe, and he gave this land to his own tribe. The original people are trying to get the land back. The first thing they have to do is to make a map of the land. And they're using, in this example, they're using aerial photos. Very, very successful. It was to me, it was a surprise to see how easy, how quickly this indigenous group, these old men, were able to use aerial photos in less than 30 minutes. They had these photos, they'd never seen these aerial photos before. They're starting to say, this is where we used to live, this place is called something else, this was the river where we did hunting. So they start to identify their land, their use of the land, which is necessary if they're going to go to the government, they're going to go to parliament, they're going to go to the court to make a claim for that land.
Un primer ejemplo muy sencillo, pero muy importante, muy contundente, es el establecer mapas con la gente para la delimitación de los territorios, ya sean locales o territorios de pueblos indígenas, en fin, la tierra, pues delimitar la tierra. Y esto pues es, digamos, un ejercicio que está sucediendo mucho en Latinoamérica porque a los pueblos indígenas no se les ha, digamos, legalizado el usufructo histórico, la ocupación histórica de sus territorios. Entonces el caso de Sudáfrica es muy interesante porque en 30 minutos, utilizando fotografías aéreas, es decir, instrumentos cartesianos, ellos pudieron encontrar sus lugares, sus sitios, y establecieron muy finamente los límites históricos para ir a negociar con la reforma agraria, con la Secretaría de Reforma Agraria. Entonces, en 30 minutos, un compañero de cualquier pueblo puede, con cierta conocimiento sobre el territorio, empezar a delimitar y empezar entonces a negociar, ¿no? Y las fotografías aéreas simplemente se pegan, se orientan y son de fácil acceso, porque es otra opción que vamos a estar hablando. Los instrumentos y los materiales tienen que ser gratis, o tienen que ser muy baratos para que la gente tenga acceso a esto, como los mapas Google, ¿sí?
Te quería comentar nada más, bueno, si están de acuerdo o lo demás, si puede ser como una breve resumen después de cada participación del doctor.
Sí.
Digo, por algunas cosas que de repente sí dices y ya se pueden escapar. En la ocasión de que, bueno, ya viendo el trabajo que tienen, que es muy similar al que nosotros tenemos ya en física.
Sí, lo que, Mike, I'm going to make a summary of each of the slides. When I feel like that is me. Y lo que le voy a pedir al doctor McCall es si es posible que esto los pasemos a una presentación de diapositivas y que lo circulemos, pues, para que pues, ustedes lo revisen.
Yeah, we don't need all because they're also written in Spanish.
Yeah.
The point of this slide is just to say that standard traditional mapping done by external surveyors is not sufficient because it is not collecting this local knowledge. The traditional surveyor will look at a standard map, will show roads, will show rivers, it might show some topography, it shows the altitude and so on, but it doesn't have all this rich information about how the land is used and what are the rights and entitlements and rules for how the land is used, which is the middle part there. Sometimes it works and sometimes not. I don't know. Anyway, it works on me but not over there. Okay. So what are the rights and regulations for how the land is used, how the resources are used? And you, as anthropologists, you know this better than me, how complicated that can be. It can take years to understand it. But again, the purpose of our participatory mapping is to try to extract those parts, elements which are important, which are significant in dealing with outside agencies. Yeah.
Es decir, detrás de un mapa que se establece con la gente sobre regímenes, propiedad comunal, lo que se puede hacer con la gente es reconocer, es decir, el mapa como un instrumento de poder lo que permite reconocer cuáles son los regímenes o las costumbres o las leyes o digamos las normas que establece la gente para digamos regular el uso del suelo. En general los mapas convencionales que utilizamos, que compramos en el INEGI, etcétera, pues traen información sobre carreteras, lugares, etcétera, pero no traen lo que hay detrás de todo esto. Y precisamente el ejercicio de la elaboración de un mapa de carácter participativo lo que permite es entender las lógicas que hay detrás de esa delimitación. Y es quizá lo más interesante para un antropólogo. Sí.
La elaboración de los mapas se está pensando para establecer un diálogo, y este diálogo pues tendría como interlocutor, por ejemplo, a funcionario público, las agencias estatales, etc. Pero han encontrado algún caso en que los mapas ayude a solucionar conflictos entre el mismo grupo, porque pues aquí también puede haber lecturas semejantes, y que pues no sé si justamente al tener cada uno una lectura semejante o quizás hasta diferente de este territorio sea realmente un recurso para pues establecer acuerdos.
He's asking if these tools have been used to understand conflicts inside the communities by different groups or gender or whatever.
Yep. Yes. One thing I said was, what is the purpose of a map? And the second question is, who is deciding the purpose of a map? If a community, I don't want to define what is a community. I'm sure as anthropologists you also are always arguing what is a community. Within a group of people living in an area, let's say a community, maybe there are conflicts, internal conflicts. And then this approach, this methodology, also can be used. Then, of course, the interesting thing for the outsider who comes with a mapping approach is to find the balance between the different groups. But I think this is part of a general issue of participation. Who is going to participate? Who decides who will participate? It's also bad for the outsider to say, you will participate, you will participate. It's also bad when the traditional leader says, I will decide who participates. To me, it's a problem with two bad sides. It's the same issue. But for the methodology of doing this local mapping, yes, of course, it can be used internally as well. A very common example is in many areas there are maybe two communities who are living together. One community is agricultural, farming, and the other community is pastoral, ganaderos. We have, so in Africa and in other places, this is a common conflict, a very common conflict. And it's a conflict about the land, the water, the grazing, the damage done by the cattle not being allowed to feed on land where the crops are. The problem is made bigger in Africa because maybe these groups have a different caste, different tribal system, maybe a different language. The problem, of course, is made bigger in that in parts of Africa the population growth rate is doubling every 20 years. So the pressure on the land is bigger and bigger and bigger.